Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and historic neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very grateful that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends all about the podcast. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Podcast Addict, Good Pods, Podbean, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Rhett Miller. He is a national recording artist, and he's the author of The Baby Changing Station. Before we invite Rhett into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by A Home for Sally by Stanetta Anthony. When Sally entered Loving Care Kennel with her siblings, she was sure they would each be adopted soon. But Sally looked different from her siblings and the other canines in the kennel. She has a missing left paw. As Sally watched her siblings and the other dogs being adopted, her dream of having a family was slowly fading away. Join Sally on her quest to find a forever home. This is a beautiful book that celebrates friendship, love, and pet adoption. Check it out today. It's a beautiful book to add to your family library. A Home for Sally by Stanetta Anthony. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Reversed, a memoir by Lois Leckford. Do you have a student who is struggling in school? Then I have a book for you. Reversed, a memoir, is a brilliant educational story that every parent and every educator must read. It is a story that tugs at your heart. As in any good story, there is a villain. And in this story, there are several. Follow Lois's journey as she overcomes the odds in this story about the importance of developing literacy in children. Lois was on the podcast a couple of years ago to tell us all about Reversed. And basically, when Lois's son was in kindergarten, first grade, she was told that he would never, ever be able to read or learn. And they were wrong. He's a graduate from college. This is a really heartwarming story. You want to check it out. It's Reversed, the memoir by Lois Leckford. Join us right now from the Hudson Valley in New York State. Our guest is here today to celebrate a beautiful and fun picture book. It's called The Baby Changing Station. Please welcome to the show, Rhett Miller. Hey, Rhett, how are you?
Woo! Hi, Jed. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I love the energy, and you can't see it at home, those of you who are listening, but Rhett has this awesome studio. It's colorful. There are guitars hanging all over the room. Rhett is a recording artist, and it's so great to have you here to see all that energy in your room and to see all the energy in you.
I love it. My kids made so much fun of me when I put together this office of mine down in the basement. I painted the walls red. I hung guitars on every square inch of the room. And my daughter said, "Dad, you're just flexing on everybody with all your guitars. It's so cringy." And then when the pandemic hit, I've done 4 shows a week from here, and I was able to, pay our mortgage and feed my kids with a job down in this cringy little office. And who's laughing now?
Well, that's the one thing about being a dad. You never get the credit that we think we deserve. We probably don't deserve it. But even if we did, we don't get it. But we get all that love from them, even when they're kind of calling us cringy.
It's so great. It's the most rewarding thing in the world. My son Max is graduating tomorrow, and I've got my mom visiting from Texas right now, and she and I were sitting in having coffee just now and thinking about how literally 5 minutes ago he was learning to throw a ball in the basement. And I know that that's a thing parents joke about. It happens so fast, but it's pretty much a scientific fact that it takes 5 minutes for them to go from being born until they're graduating from high school. And I'm not going to cry tomorrow. I mean, I might be. There might be allergies. I don't know.
Yes. It really does go fast. And I remember people, when we were expecting, people saying that, and I didn't believe them. And there was a time when my son was in middle school that seemed to slow down. It was really challenging. But it's a beautiful thing. It's the best thing that I've ever done in my life, being a parent.
Yes, agreed, 100% agreed. And I wouldn't have written either of these two kids' books if it hadn't been for me trying to impress my kids and come up with funny ways to bond with them. And my job is, my main gig is I'm a touring musician. And the second half of that is great. I love being a musician. The first half of that, the touring part, has always been really tough. And you probably know, because you do a lot of traveling for work. It's really hard to not be there every night when they go to bed, and not be there every morning when they wake up. And I remember when they were really young, we were reading a lot. We always read a lot of books. Books, as you know, the best thing you can do with kids, because it establishes a level of intelligence, and you can talk about all the different themes that the books bring up. We were really into the kind of funny poetry of Shel Silverstein was a big one. Some Roald Dahl, that kind of stuff. And so when I would go on tour, I would call them up and I'd say, all right, I'm working on this book of kids' poems, which at the time I wasn't. To be clear, that was just a ruse. And so I would say, I've got this new kids' poem. I'm going to need your help with it. And so I would read it to them, and they would tell me everything that was wrong with it, because that's what they live for, to tell me how they're right and I'm wrong. And I utilized so many of their notes when I was putting together the finished book. Eventually, I looked at this stack of kids' poems and I thought, okay, I got to do this for real. These are too good.
Yeah. You let out a little secret. Everybody thinks that being on the road is so glamorous and so much fun, and it's really just kind of like, okay, which Holiday Inn Express am I in what city today?
Yeah, and all the cities kind of run together, and you just don't even know. It can be very lonely.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, it can be. But I did the same thing that you did. I would bring kids' books on the road with me, and I'd get on the telephone and I'd read them to my kids. And my kids are old enough that I actually read a couple in the hallway on a payphone in a hotel. But it was worth it, because you can't get that time back, and it does go so fast. And I think that when you make the effort to do that, to be there, whether it's on the phone or on Zoom now, and especially in person, our kids really appreciate it.
They do. And at the time, they may act like they have better things to do. But, I know now that they're older, now that they're both, big, giant teenagers. He's technically even an adult, I guess, in the eyes of the law. But they talk about how important it was that I prioritized them. Mm-hmm. And in a way, as a parent, I look back, I wish I had more, maybe, the little regrets we have. But I know that I have always gone out of my way to love them and show them that. And writing these books was definitely a byproduct of that.
Yeah. So tell us about the baby changing station. It's not what you might think. He's not singing about this beautiful baby changing station where you change the diapers.
No. In fact, the baby changing station provides a bit of a Faustian element. The old story of Faust, where you have this sort of devil's bargain. The older brother, I myself have a younger brother and younger sister. And the story that my mom would always tell, when she brought my brother home and I was only 18 months old, I immediately, walked, she said it, laid him down in his crib. And I walked to the corner of the room and turned my back and crossed my arms and refused to acknowledge him. There was maybe some intimation that I might have walked in with a pillow where I was trying to hide him. I mean, hopefully nothing scarier than that, but I didn't want the competition. Mm-hmm. And so the sibling rivalry theme is one that I explored a lot back in No More Poems. And then it really took over the baby changing station, where an older brother, James, has a new younger brother that he's really jealous of. And he gets presented in the book with an opportunity to, no one will be any the wiser if you trade out your new baby brother. And he gets these options, these 3 really cool sort of gift packages. And he has to wrestle with the idea of getting rid of this new younger brother. And in the process, of course, I don't want to spoil it, but he figures out that there's not all that, there's more good things maybe than bad about this sweet little brother he's now saddled with.
Yeah, really cool. So your mom didn't do what we did with my son when my daughter came into the world. Is when he arrived at the hospital to say hi to her, we had this gift. Mm-hmm. We said, Alejandro brought you this gift. And he was genuinely stunned and just like so touched. And, she brought it. She had it inside of mommy and brought it out. But it worked for a bit, but the sibling rivalry was absolutely there. So, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it gave us a little peace for a while.
And it's funny, too, because my kids are about the same. They're a couple of years apart, and it's an older boy and a younger girl, Max and Soleil. And the closeness now that they have and the amount of laughter that they give each other and the sweetness, whenever he comes home from a big day out, he goes straight into her room and plops down on the floor and gives her the, minute by minute run down, and she does the same for him. And it's really incredible. And I feel the same way about my own siblings. And it's that there's a thing that happens, Jed, that happens to me when I write songs. If it's a really good song, every once in a while, as I'm writing the end of it, I'll get choked up, which is, it makes sense, right? Because I'm the first audience of this thing, right? And it happened with Baby Changing Station. And because I surprised myself when I got to the end of the book, there's just a really cute little, sort of twist right at the very end. And when I got to it and it popped into my head that was what was going to happen, I just started crying. And it was the sweetest thing because I was thinking about how much I love my siblings and how much they mean to me and how much my kids love each other. And I feel like that was what in the end made this book something that I was really proud of and was really grateful that Little Brown wanted to put out.
Yeah. What's the difference between writing songs and writing children's books?
Oh my gosh. Well, my first children's book was poems, and the difference between writing songs and poems isn't that great, right? It's not that large. I wrote poems when I was a kid and teenager, and then it became cooler to write songs. But songs are basically just a bunch of rhymed couplets, and a song is sort of a musical excuse to write a poem and thrust it upon the world. So those poems weren't that big of a difference. I could be a lot goofier. I could explore subjects that were a little more banal. Sometimes the bathroom humor would creep in. But writing a full-on kids book was a lot more like long-form fiction. This is a rhyming book, so the rhyme scheme is pretty complicated. It's people have names. My name is James. I'm a regular 10-year-old kid. I always thought I was nice, but I'm not. I feel bad about this thing that I did. So it's a really intricate rhyme scheme to maintain for all those stanzas. So in that way, it was similar to music because I had a set of rules that I'd established for myself, the meter, the rhymes. And then within that, you can't reuse rhymes or words that often. You can here and there, but certainly not that close together. So they're like music. There's a lot of rules and then a lot of internal rules that you establish as you go, and they get more ingrained as the piece gets bigger. But I really had to carry a narrative, and I really had to carry characters from the beginning of a story to the end. I had to watch them evolve, hopefully. And then, I had to sort of let go of them when the story was over. A miniature version of that happens in songwriting, but the rules are way looser. Like I can have a vague idea of what a song's about and be finished with it. And then a year later, go back to that song and say, I think I know now what that song was about. With this book, I had to really feel like I had a firm grasp on who the characters were and what they were dealing with at the moment.
Yeah. When you're writing a song, part of the story is told with the musical accompaniment. As a picture book author, your story is told in a lot of ways by your illustrator. As a songwriter, you're kind of like in charge of the whole thing. You're painting the notes and the music. As a picture book author, you're handing that part off to an illustrator. Was that difficult for you? The
lucky thing for me is that because the children's books were sort of a secondary sideline part of my artistic expression. I've never felt as terrified as I sometimes do about music. With this, I've been a little more fearless, which is great. It's such a great feeling. And when it came to hooking up with Dan Santat, my illustrator on both of my kids' books, it was actually, I think, a really good lesson for anyone, kids who might be listening or aspiring children's authors. My editors said, when I brought him up, I'd heard Dan on a podcast that I had been interviewed by this podcast about authors. Mm-hmm. And Dan's episode of the podcast jumped out at me, and I thought, oh, this guy seems cool. I had no idea who he was or what he'd accomplished. I thought I might recognize his work. Maybe my kids had some of his books. So I brought Dan up after listening to his interview because I thought he sounded so cool, like a guy that I would really get along with. And I brought him up to my editors, and they said, oh, well, Dan is the #1 children's illustrator in America. There's no way we can get Dan Santat. And I said, well, you might as well ask him. And they asked him, and it turned out he is not only a fan of music in general, but he was a fan of my band, and he liked the poems, which the first book was all poems, and he was up for it. He was totally up for it. He made time in his schedule. He did the book, and he and I became great friends, and we've done a lot of stuff together. The one thing that will bring you together is visiting grade schools, because those kids are so, as you know, they're so funny, and so the things that they say, the filter is non-existent, and it's your job not just to entertain them, but also to sort of wrangle them and make sense of this time you're spending with them. And Dan is the best at that. He's so funny, and he's so generous with his skills and with his wisdom. And so learning from him and spending time with him made it pretty obvious that I wanted to bring him back for book number 2. And that also, because he's so busy, that meant waiting a little while longer than I might have otherwise. But I knew once he and I connected that he was going to add an element that would not just, sort of carry it home, but it would take my books to a place that they could never have even come close to. So the illustrations, I feel like, are going to reach people. That's sort of the first thing that reaches people. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it's the text, and they live with the text, and maybe the second or third reading, they find the deeper little pieces in there that are hidden. They get into the story and fall in love with it, but it's the illustrations that really pull people in and make people fall in love with the book on first blush.
Yeah. Boy, it's a lot different performing for grade school kids than being in a nightclub singing songs for them, huh?
It is and it isn't. I mean, it's like the fundamental stuff is you can't assume that they're just going to love you because you're you. Yeah. There's my pet peeve about people that do what I do. Sometimes they'll walk up on a stage, perch themselves on a stool, and say, all right, I'm going to read from my diary. Everybody be super quiet and listen to my innermost thoughts. I'm like, no, it's not how it works. You kind of have to earn it. You're an entertainer. You have to entertain them. And part of that, I feel like, is honesty. It's really just standing up in front of them and making yourself vulnerable, letting them know that you are willing to accept your own fallibility and goofiness, and that you're all on the same level and you're all human beings. And once you've established that, whether it's grade school kids or old barflies, I mean, it's all the same, connection. And that's what I love so much. And when you're writing a book, you're also making a connection. You just have to do a little more mental hoop jumping to remind yourself that it's going to take a while for the book to get out into the world, and then it will do the job of connecting with people.
Yeah. Connecting, you reminded me of one of my most beautiful memories being on stage at a school. And I turned, and there's this little preschooler walked up on stage and said, "Can you tie my shoe for me?" And I did. I stopped the show and went down and tied his shoe. The teacher was so embarrassed. She's like, "I'm so sorry." I goes, "What do you mean? You're sorry? This is great. I couldn't have asked for talk about connecting. It was just wonderful." But speaking of connecting, both you and I, when we're in front of an audience, we are connecting. And we talked a little bit about my experience, the first experience on Zoom, and not realizing there was a delay, and that really kind of shook me. As an author, There is a big delay because there's maybe like, it's not 3 seconds like I experienced. There's like a year or 2 years between the time you finish, putting that last period in the book to when people are reading it and giving you feedback on it. How you've been able to deal with that?
I've learned over the years from making records that can be the hardest time because you've finished it, it's out of your hands, you've edited it, you've put it to bed, but then you have to wait until you find out whether or not the world is going to love it, which is its own kind of goofy thing. You need to love your thing you do regardless of the feedback, right? But that's also impossible. So you have to survive that period of waiting. And for me, it really helps that I have music as my main thing. And so I'm constantly writing songs, I'm making records, I'm doing tours. If I only had children's books, then my family might have a little more of the cranky version of me walking around the house just so impatient for the books to come out. But I'm so glad it's finally coming out, Jed. It's been a couple of years, and it's worth the wait because I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. But boy, it can be a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be. Tell us a little bit about your music, and folks who aren't familiar with Rhett Miller musically, what kind of sound do you bring to people?
So I'm a 7th generation Texan, even though I live in New York now, and my kids are New Yorkers. It's okay. So I grew up listening to a lot of Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash. But then I love to rock and roll. So my band, Old 97, started 29 years ago. It'll be 30 years next year. And we have made over the years a dozen studio albums and a bunch of, other kind of albums, collections of singles and live albums. I also make solo records. There is definitely an element of kind of that twangy, rootsy Americana, kind of a little bit country sound to what I do and we do. A little bit like folk music, honestly, but, very much rock and roll. There's a lot of stuff that's really sweet that you could certainly listen to with the whole family. There's a handful of stuff that's a little bit more adult, we spend a lot of time singing in bars, and that's part of my life too. But in the end, I really love making music. I love going around and singing and dancing for people. And like we said earlier, just connecting with people. I think to me, that's sort of the meaning of life is you fill up the world with, beautiful things that try to grapple with the question of what it means to be a human being. And whether that's my songs or whether that's these kids' books, it's all that question of, how do we figure out how to love each other better and make sense of this crazy life?
I love that. And what a great lesson to teach our kids, that's ultimately the goal, is not to collect the most stuff and not to have the biggest stuff and not to have the shiniest stuff, but to love the most and find the ways to realize that we're all part of one beautiful family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Rhett, where can folks go to find out? I know that the Baby Changing Station is available for pre-order right now. And if you go to Amazon, you have to make sure that you type in the Baby Changing Station, Rhett Miller, because otherwise you're going to get a dozen Baby Changing Stations. Because I just did.
I didn't think about that. Oh no!
So then put in books, and and then you'll come up and you can pre-order it. It's available for the world in August 2022. But where else can they go to find out more about you, about your other book, and about your music?
I'm pretty active. I'm most active on Instagram, Rhett Miller, no dots, dashes, underscores, just Rhett Miller. I also go to visit Twitter when I can handle it. And it's, again, that's just Rhett Miller with no additional punctuation. Facebook is mostly managed by my team, although I'll jump on there every once in a while. I do a lot of shows. I'm doing a lot of gigs, solo in July. The Old 97s go out in September and October. We'll be working on a new record soon. I'm not only not hard to find, I'm sort of hard to once you started hearing my name, you'll get sick of it.
Well, I don't think, but it's a good kind of sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of those infections you want to catch. We had a great time speaking to the author of The Baby Changing Station, the brand new picture book from our guest, Rhett Miller. Hey, Rhett, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks
so much for having me, and thanks for all you do.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be J.P. Miller. She'll be here to celebrate Rebecca Lee Crumpler. It's part of her Leaders Like Us series. I was made aware of JP by one of our listeners. And check this out. I was really excited to talk to her. Rebecca Lee Crumpler is the first African-American doctor, female doctor, here in the United States. And she served people right here in the neighborhood of Reedville. So exciting. History right here in our little neighborhood. Check it out. It's our next episode. Our guest is J.P. Miller. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, whether it's a picture book, board book, middle grade novel, YA title, we would love to have you as a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell the world about your fantastic children's book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page, and scroll on down to be a guest. Oh, while you're there, you might as well scroll on down a little bit further to find out about our Certified Great Read panel. If our panel believes your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read, letting families know that your book belongs on their family library shelves. Oh, you can scroll down even a little further and find out about our monthly promotion programs. Find out how we can celebrate your book with commercials here on the podcast, with messages to our 99,000 plus social media followers, and display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Learn all about that and more by going to readingwithyourkids.com, clicking on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Rhett Miller. Please be sure to check out The Baby Changing Station. And like I said in the interview, if you're on Amazon, make sure that you put in by Rhett Miller or search in books. Otherwise, you'll just get those Baby Changing Station. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Bell Castro, Ashley Contouris, Mirabella Q, Rain Penn. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.